So, welcome to a very special episode of The Usual Place because this is the first time we have taken the show on the road. And as Dan mentioned, this episode is in partnership with the Singapore Land Authority. Now, we're live at the Foundry at Prinsep Link, and it used to be the Elections Department building, in case some of you don't know. Now, it's since been renovated and remodeled, and it's now a vibrant spot for non-profit organizations to come together to incubate ideas, drive innovations, and build communities, which also makes it the perfect spot for us to talk about how old buildings like this one can undergo a revival. Now, to help me dissect the very big question that we asked, I have Colin Low, the Chief Executive of SLA, on the couch. Welcome, Colin.
Thank you.
And next to you on the couch is also Wee Liang, a university student who is studying real estate. Now, he's also a heritage arts and culture content creator. So if you came to the podcast because you saw his stories promoting this, so thank you very much. And if you don't know Wee Liang, you can check him out after this podcast. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
So we teased the topic with the headline about the role that younger people can play. So some old buildings don't have an obvious nostalgic appeal, especially for younger people. Now, how do we get them to care about heritage spaces that might be unfamiliar to them? Colin, you're
Thanks,
thinking.
Natasha. Well,
Just
good evening,
arrowing
everybody.
you, yes.
Yeah, thanks very much. Good evening, everyone. It's good to be here. It's great to be in a room full of young and younger people, and I think it's that I'm acutely aware that I have single-handedly raised the average age of the panelists here, as you can tell. But I want to thank ST for organizing this, and it's an interesting conversation topic about how do you get young people involved into reviving heritage buildings or old buildings in Singapore. Because buildings are not just physical structures. They are opportunities waiting to be unlocked. And buildings is a reflection of our collective history, our shared identity, what we were in the past, what we are today, and what we will be, or inspiration to and foundation to what we can be in future. Natasha, you're absolutely right. Here we are at the Foundry itself. It used to be an election office. And if you think about the structure of the property, it's a square box. It's not something exciting. But when the team in SLA thought about what can we do best to activate the space, if you recall, sometime last year, we facilitated a pop-up exhibition. It was called the LKYD Experience. It is an immersive experience, interactive, so visitors have to walk through the different theme rooms depicting the life of our late founding father, late Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. And it was very interesting, a lot of good reviews. What was supposed to be a 3-month run was extended to 6 months. But that's a pop-up. So when the team got together from SLA, we were thinking, how do we find a long-term tenant for this space? And there are a few considerations that came to our mind. First, some time back ago, COVID, pandemic. When pandemic struck, what was a fascinating thing was that there were a lot of good hearts, good soul people, young people especially, came up with ground-up initiatives for different causes, the old folks, the foreign workers. But the issue is that all this were all over the place. Now the question is where is that central hub or location where like-minded people can come together, co-create, collaborate, have intended conversations, have unintended conversations, and perhaps you can find a mentor that can advise you so they have to go through the same mistakes that predecessors have gone through. And better still, if you manage to find a donor or financier that feels strongly for your cause, I think that's very interesting. So with that in mind, a couple of things that we want to tease out. And first of all, if you look at this property, look at the location. If you analyze the neighborhood and locality, it's full of young people, no different from the young people we have in the audience today. You have the SOTA, you have LaSalle, NAFA, SMU, right? Young people, full of energy, full of passion, full of purpose. And if you make this as a social impact hub, make it porous, what you can do is to draw young people in very early on that doing good journey. And that is what's happening right now in the Foundry. What it was in the past, an old election office, what is it today, a social impact hub? What is it in the future? Who's to know? Because of the space being used, you've got new social enterprises emerging or birth from this particular location. So that's the Foundry. I want to bring another example, not a historical building, but less iconic, New Bahru.
We have a lot to say about that.
A lot, huh?
A lot
So I'm not
later.
sure how many of you have been to New Bahru or heard about New Bahru. If you ask me, I think it's an interesting building. It's a former Nan Chiau school, River Valley area, Kim Yan area, built in the 1970s. I like the architecture. Nothing fanciful, nothing iconic per se, but you have nice red brick work. You've got this curved arches on the roof. And interestingly, before it was New Bahru, there were a smattering of offices, some F&B, trampolining park. I think a lot of them are quite young. I don't think you have kids yet, but a lot of parents like to hope the birthday parties at trampolining park. And the open car park is where it's a rest stop for taxi uncles. So there are a lot of taxis and uncles there. Of course, over the years, that became your private car hires, your Grab, your Gojek, but it was that, And when the lease came to an end, the team in SLA was discussing and were thinking, is that the best use of that space? It could be same old, yeah? And I also like to, toy this idea with, joke this with my team in SLA. Actually, our job can be quite simple. You can lock ourselves in a cave. We can still do our job, If the highest bidder is a tuition agency, it will be a massive tuition hub.
You might get people.
Yeah.
You
But is
still
that the
get
best
people.
use? Yeah.
Yeah.
And if the highest bidder were to be a seafood zi cha enclave, you will have a massive zi cha seafood enclave. But is that the best use of the property? So a few things that we did differently. Yeah. So the team got down and discussed, and two things that we did differently. First of all, we talk about tenancy. Previously, a lot of the tenancies, SLA tenancies, have been on 3 years plus 3 years plus 3 years. We spoke to some agencies, some authorities, got the approval. We changed it to 5 plus 4. It may be a small change, but instinctively, would-be potential bidders now have a longer investment horizon. They think differently. They can dare to dream a little bit bigger. Second thing is what we introduce as price quality tender. Very important concept. It's not the highest rent will win. Price P meaning the rent. Q meaning the quality. What is the concept? What is the proposal? Is there something new to Singapore? Is there something new to the area? Do we have community involvement? Is there sustainability elements involved in that? And we deliberately dropped the price weightage down to 30%. 30% P, 70% Q. So it's not the highest rent will win. In fact, it's a combined score. And if you have visited New Bahru, look at it today, the master tenant in New Bahru certainly wasn't the highest rent, but look at the place now. It's a vibrant enclave, over 40 retailers, Singaporean base. You have a wellness hub, you have got co-living, you've got multiple F&B outlets, and a lot of young people are there. And the funny thing was that increasingly, we're not just seeing young people from Singapore.
Yeah.
We are seeing tourists sauntering in, and it's not exactly your most convenient location, no MRT nearby, but yet, these folks are looking for off-the-beaten track, interesting locations. So again, Foundry, New Bahru, nothing exciting per se, but if you create the narrative, create the resonance, create the stories behind the spaces, that's where you get engagement.
So since you mentioned a young person, I want to ask a young person on the couch.
This is a real young person.
Young person on the couch. Yeah. So Colin brought out Foundry and New Bahru. Yeah. As a young person who likes Singapore's heritage spaces or old buildings, how would you encourage your peers to look beyond the facade or even get to know what our island has?
Yeah, I think for me the most important way for someone to appreciate all these old buildings is through associations. Basically, your personal association and memories of these spaces. So, for example, in the context of today, like myself, I honestly have not known about this building.
I saw someone in the front row, so I was like, oh, this used to be elections department. I didn't know.
I think it's a building that I always walk past, but never, yes, we know it's an old building, but never really cared much about it. But I think after today, especially being here right now, and all of you being here as well, when the next time you guys walk past this building, like, hey, I remember I was here for this Straits Times talk. Yeah, and that's a way of forming associations. And I think this is a way for people to appreciate a place better because now you have some personal memories with the space. It's not just the former elections hub anymore, but it's a place where you actually maybe you met a new friend today, and that's something special to remember. So I think for the case of New Bahru, I think that's also another interesting thing because now New Bahru has shops that kind of cater to, I think I would say quite a wide variety of audiences. You have supermarkets, you have lifestyle shops, you have craft shops, you have plant shops. And I think this will also help to build that association people may have. So I think even Samsung recently had this lifestyle event there. They had some media event at New Bahru. And I think through events like this, when people could go and visit, they go and shop at Soy Boy or something. And then they can remember like, oh yeah, this plant at home, I bought it from New Bahru. And now there's this like personal association attached to the place. And actually you feel more, you care more about that place, because you have memories made there.
Because we're talking about New Bahru, that's why I wanted to ask, because sometimes these repurposed heritage spaces, how do we keep them accessible to all? Like if I go to New Bahru, sometimes the brands can be a bit atas lah, right? So how do we keep them accessible to all? Or is it a one-time visit and then maybe I'll find another space to visit?
Actually, there are multiple offerings for different people. If you think about New Bahru, for example, you pay for a cup of coffee, it's probably the same price as your value meal in a fast food restaurant, but you get immersed into the different shops, right? You think about, I think Wee Liang spoke about the craftsmanship and so on and so forth. And if you recall, I think 2 weeks ago, as part of the Singapore Art Week, New Bahru had a public art exhibition. It's free of charge, and you go in, you get immersed in the whole storytelling and the art side of things. And not too long ago, there was a pop-up called School of Tomorrow, completely free as well. Imagine how you walk through the school of yesterday, juxtaposed with the current day and the future age. And last year, I think I remember it was November, December, in the school hall, right? So New Bahru had a school hall in level 3. There were various pop-ups and exhibitions. In fact, this two ladies behind Greenhouse had a flea market. It's a sustainability theme flea market, and it was really interesting. A lot of traction, not high price kind of offerings, but it's to get involved in the whole Singaporean way of doing things in craftsmanship and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
Wee Liang, sorry.
I do agree with that also. I think it's when you talk about getting like being relevant to today's world, I also thought of pop-ups and events, because I think this is something that brings people there. And usually from what I've noticed so far, if something is permanent, naturally people will stop going to those places. But then if, let's say Singapore Art Week, for example, which is a roving thing that happens every year, maybe today is at New Bahru, maybe this is at New Bahru, maybe next year is at another location, I think that will help drive people in. And after all, most of the time it's free. Even like, let's say, pop-up booths, it could. I think a potential way to draw in customers or visitors as well is basically to have, I think it's quite popular now for youths to have their own small businesses, and we like to sell crafts, like to sell prints, our art prints and everything. So I think that's also a way, for boothing to happen in SLA properties, and this will attract people to come in for free, and yet, maybe support our small creators, small businesses. At the same time, SLA could earn a bit of income, from the rental.
Yeah, young people need to call SLA, guys. You guys just call in.
But it's right. It's about constantly curating, right?
Yeah.
Because whims and fancies, needs change all the time. Yeah.
So when we rejuvenate spaces, right, how do we strike a balance between keeping them relevant for modern day, with your pop-ups and your new brands, right? But also, how do we honor the past and not reduce the building to a mere preservation of its exteriors?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I think, in a lot of places, you tend to preserve old buildings first. And you can think about how does it connect to the current clientele and local needs. A couple of properties come to my mind. In fact, we've got disused CC. It's called number 10. It's at number 10 Kampong Eunos. And it was a CC that was built in the 1970s. In fact, the late Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was the one who opened it. Nondescript building, in fact, a boring building, and 2-story and so on and so forth, with a car park in front and courtyard behind. But if you go and visit now, it has transformed into a creative accelerator hub for kids. So imagine makers tables, makers benches, kids dabbling into tactile skills. Think about laser engraving, wood crafting. Children doing recycling projects of recycled bottles with cardboard, come out with a remote control car. And that's the kind of spirit, and it's free of charge. So low-income children or children from low-income families who otherwise may not be able to afford expensive robotic coding lessons can come here. And I think that's the spirit of having things done differently, connecting back to what a property can be pivoted to a different experience.
Wee Liang, do you think that more can be done to promote older spaces to younger people?
I think your questions asked about how can we remember the heritage or the history behind the building, right? So I think it's very important to have some heritage interpretation of the place. So basically, through murals like the murals in Chinatown to kind of depict what life used to be. So I actually went to New Bahru recently. I wasn't very impressed with that, unfortunately, because
why?
Yeah, because in the whole of New Bahru, there was only like a small plaque that I found describing what the school hall is about. But I think it would be better if, let's say, I know like the layout of how the school used to look like.
Right.
So maybe like, oh, this block used to be the science block. This block used to be a classroom.
Interesting suggestion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
rather
so
than
it's giving
just
you
like
feedback straight out.
That's why you need young
Yeah.
people, right?
Yeah, and also I think in terms of nomenclature can be another way to remember spaces. So like for New Bahru, for instance, yes, it's the former Nan Chiau High School, but with the name New Bahru now is basically new, and if let's say someone who is unfamiliar with the history wouldn't know what this place used to be. But I also understand this can cause some conflict, because if you were to name it after Nan Chiau High School, then people will say like, oh, why are you pushing Nan Chiau High School to this pedestrian? And yeah,
But
so
interesting that you mentioned this because it becomes a conversation piece.
Yeah.
What is New Bahru? Why
Yeah.
new? Why Bahru? We're a multiracial, multi-language society in Singapore. Again, you're not familiar with Kada. This is at, typically I like to say this behind Maxwell Market. Because the sad thing is that when I ask my friends and talk to people, they were like, huh? Behind Maxwell got building meh? They know about Maxwell Market. They know about URA Centre. Some people know about Scarlet Hotel. But a building that's left empty, and it's a beautiful historical art deco building, 102 years old. So when the team looked at this, again, we did a PQ exercise. It's not the highest rent. We went it, and if you go and visit there now, it's transformed. It's into a lifestyle enclave. There's co-living at the top, 18 units, young people, young guests. And the other thing is that 15 to 17 F&B outlets. And what is very heartening to us is that a lot of the people who set up shops there, the coffee places, are actually very young people. And as a consequence of that, comes the next question. They are keen, and these young folks who are set up as tenants, as well as their respective clientele, they're very keen to find out, what is this building? What was it in the past? Kada has the oldest electric lift in Singapore. It's those with double grilled. And the reason why is because it was formerly a St. Andrew's Mission Hospital. So when back in those days, the kids that have jaundice will take the lift up to suntan the roof. So that's a very interesting way. And not just that, but if you go and look at socials, you go and Google Kada, it's all over the place right now. In fact, 2 days ago, a friend of mine just texted me and showed me a video. It's a feature on Kada, and it's on Xiaohongshu. So it's not just young people from Singapore visiting Kada, which was previously unloved. It's people from outside as well. So that's the connection. Create a history, create a narrative, and it's how we get young people engaged to a historical building.
yeah.
Okay. So, Wee Liang, will social media save us? Save our old buildings, is that what it is?
Well, I think ultimately it's up to the state, right? But I think what youth can do, especially how outspoken we are on social media, we could kind of raise awareness about these things. Yeah, so I think this is also why I started off with association. When you have association, and that's when you kind of fight for the place, because now you have a memory of it. If let's say, if before this, if let's say this building were to have some changes, I wouldn't really care, honestly. But now that I have this memory, I'm like, okay, this place means a lot to me now, so I would want to keep it as much as possible. And I think this is why I feel like the root is about having association with the place. And with that, if let's say there were any changes, I think that's where youth may feel the need to, okay, I want to preserve this, but at the same time think of how we can preserve this while also like progressing as a country because of how limited our land is, right? So we also got to understand that we can't conserve everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
So if you want to keep it, at least think of, I think being youth also, we have a lot of new ideas. We're exposed to like a lot of things because of the internet. So I think this helps us to kind of ideate also. Like it's easier for us to think of new ways to kind of tackle this challenge. Yeah.
So, Colin, I have a question for you. How does SLA find the right formula for creating new users for the properties it manages? And what factors actually signal the need for a revisit or a refresh? And I'm actually talking about Dempsey or places like Gilman Barracks, which, we've read over the years, like, it's changing, it's constantly changing. So what's your thoughts on that?
I think you need to know the pulse on the ground. There's no escaping from that. I mean, we have been a very proactive landlord. I think we have met about more than 200 different people. We met chefs, we met Michelin star chefs, we met the co-living, co-working operators, hoteliers, social enterprises, and so forth. So you understand what is happening on the ground. And when you look at different properties, it's a top-down and bottom-up approach. Meaning, if you look at the whole of Singapore, some enclaves are quite nicely settled as residential, so on and so forth. But when you look at specifics, some heritage buildings could be near transportation nodes. Does it work better as a residential or does it work better as a commercial enterprise? That's what's happening right now. And I say bottom up as well because a lot of times when you look at a particular property, the shape of the property, the typology of the property doesn't allow you to do that. So how do you have that connection of top down and bottom up, and then you pivot correctly? And a lot of times when you talk about people, you meet different people, you get what is happening on the ground, and that's how you can pivot correctly. I mean, for example, kada came from a lot of times unintended conversation over a coffee, for example. In fact, this property started as a conversation in Dempsey between ourselves and some social enterprise, in this case, the Foundry. And we found out that they were looking for a space. We had unusual spaces as well. One thing led to another, and here we are. It's a social impact hub, previously vacant for quite some time, and we can see the positive benefits of this space being used correctly.
So which is the next hottest SLA property we should look out for? Beyond Dempsey and Gilman and...
Quite a few things, yeah. We've got... Well,
the platform.
in terms... Thanks for that. In terms of... there's a good shout out, yeah. In terms of things that's happening, quite a few properties are coming up. Temasek Shop House, very near here. It was closed for renovation, but come this year, you'll be open as an expanded Temasek Shop House, a pre-war building, a social impact hub. Looking forward to it. In April, well, Smith Street in Chinatown. You thought about Chinatown, you thought about Smith Street. This is an SLA property, and if you go and visit there right now, there are a couple of interesting F&B, I mean the local brands, the Kilini and so on and so forth. But the corner of the junction between Smith Street and Terengganu, Starbucks is going to be there. It's a triple-story L-shaped thing, and I heard, as I understand from Starbucks, they're going to introduce interesting drinks and paraphernalia that's unique to that particular outlet. So we're saying Pipakao coffee, or, I don't know what they're going to come up with, but it's something interesting.
Okay, maybe Colin, we don't have you on the menu creation, but all right,
and I think different outlets. I mean, Dempsey, you spoke about Dempsey. It's quite interesting that you spoke about Dempsey, and it's a constant rejuvenation. 20 years ago, it was the army barracks. Nobody gave it a chance, but if you go and visit now, it's a very interesting enclave for local tourists, for international tourists, and I think. Interesting that you mentioned Dempsey. Just a couple of days ago, I came across this video of an interview with a Malaysian developer. The developer's name is UOA. So the interviewer was asking the founder of UOA, because UOA is the developer behind Bamboo Hills in KL. I never heard about that. And he asked the founder, so what's the inspiration behind Bamboo Hills? It's a fascinating enclave, interesting projects and restaurants. And the founder answered unabashedly, I copy from Dempsey. So when I saw that, I told my guys, I think that would be a testimony that I think we have done something right. But we're not resting on our laurels. If you think about Dempsey, well, maybe a few years ago, 90% are F&B outlets. But we want to improve the round-the-clock experience by introducing non-F&B, because F&B is transactional. So if you look at Dempsey right now, we have announced a couple of new tenants, right? We have the Cage at Dempsey, not too long ago, sports and wellness, again PQ tender. So they actually work with low-income children and get them, in for free soccer sessions. We've got the likes of a Pilates, a wellness tenant that's coming in. We've got a florist coming in as well, a florist come cafe kind of thing. So we're constantly talking about this, and through various interactions with Michelin star chefs, with normal people, with music folks, we kind of know and try to understand what the pulse of the market is and react accordingly.
Yeah. Wee Liang, you excited about the plans?
About Dempsey?
Pilates?
Yes, Pilates, yes. I mean, from a young person's point of view, is there anything you want to see out of these older spaces?
I think, let's say in terms of Dempsey or New Bahru, as we talk about, I think the main problem is that they can be quite expensive. Like the tenants that come in are pretty atas like tenants. Yeah, so let's say when I was at New Bahru, although it's very interesting, you get to see different new shops that you don't normally see in shopping centers. It's not like Uniqlo, Cotton On. But you get to see what look like local homegrown brands. But the thing is, they are still pretty atas for me. Probably the thing I can afford there is a supermarket at most. So I think a way to kind of bring youth to these places is probably have some form of activities or places that the youth can go. Because, I believe most of us are students. If you're looking at youths, or I am a student myself, so there's this financial constraint. Yeah, but I think for Kada, it kind of worked well because it's right beside Maxwell. So it's good that we can have lunch at Maxwell, have like affordable food at Maxwell, and then go over for like coffee, like maybe like a $6 coffee.
After chicken rice, yeah.
Yeah. So I think, but that is, based on location. So there are some things you can't really, it just happened to be there. But I think that's one way. Yeah.
No, it's about multiple offerings for different people. It's different offerings across the island. I spoke about the fact that you can get a coffee in New Bahru and there's free kind of a arts kind of a publication or event. But if you think about the various offerings, there's no one cookie cutter. The way we look at things, right? It's about multiple offerings, different locations, different experiences. Case in point, it's I don't know if you heard about this. Coming back to your question about what exciting thing is happening, Kampong Java. 52 Kampong Java. It's a I would say a pre-war residential stretch of houses, but now and coming, I think second quarter, third quarter, it will be open as an art space. It's an inclusive, affordable art space. So it's arts for artists, young artists to try out different things. And that's one idea. A second property that we have is Vida City. I'm not sure you heard about it. This is the old Loyang Primary School. Again, is a hub kind of a mentality. This is a sustainability hub, free of charge or cheap rent for all startups in the whole sustainability space coming together and getting kids involved. So different offerings, no one cookie cutter. Certainly, it's important to understand what the microclimate and the location is and where your target market is. Yeah.
So thank you for bringing up KL just now, because on my last question, I wanted to ask you to quickly share, what are some unconventional or creative ways in which each of you have seen old buildings repurposed? Not in Singapore, but you hope that, we could see it somewhere here. Maybe, Wee Liang, you want to tell us quickly?
I think I've not traveled enough to kind of answer in the context of a broader region. But I think Singapore, there are some buildings that I'm quite looking for, like let's say the former Singapore Poly building, which, we used to be Singapore Poly. And now it's going to turn into an MRT station, the Circle Line extension. And because the building is huge, right, I believe URA will also, introduce some shops in the building as well. So I'm not too sure what is going to happen to that building, but all I know is going to be a transit place. And hopefully there will be an interesting change of use in the place. And I think New Bahru is also very interesting because it's such a huge area, which honestly, when the lease ended, I was low-key expecting the building to be demolished, honestly. So I'm very glad that it was saved and in fact brought in with a new life. And I think the modular structures of a school kind of help because it's easy to fit your shops in, and then it's basically I think it's quite cool, with the corridor and all, you can just walk past the shop. It feels like a school, but at the same time, it's more fun than a school.
Interesting that Wee Liang mentioned about school, right? Another project in Singapore. I'll talk about Singapore first. An SLA project. I can talk about SLA project. I can. Okay. Yes. Anyway, Nadi Henderson Road. This is a former school. If you understand Henderson, as it is right now, there's an econ elderly care. There's a child care existing, and there's a community farm. And when there's an adjoining block, the Henderson Primary School came on board, the team was discussing. Again, we have done a few co-living before. I think co-living is another 6 or 7 of them now. Upper Bukit Timah, Hindu Road in Little India. But when this particular property in 98 Henderson Road came about, we wanted to try something a bit different. It's co-living, PQ, co-living, but we said we want to angle it as a silver co-living. Not so much the young folks here, but the silver, independent, non-assisted, elderly folks, empty nesters. So we did a PQ tender, and if you interview, another news agency actually interviewed the winning tenderer. Quite interesting concept. The ground floor will be for the silver folks because mobility challenge, but still independent. And the upper floors, they want young people to be there. And they interview the young people. If you're a young co-living guest, you can demonstrate, you can add value to this particular community. You can get brownie points, lower rent, I'm not sure what they have, but it allows and encourages, not prescriptive, intergenerational connection. I think that's what we want to see. And if you imagine you have a collective group of independent silver hat folks, imagine the goodwill and the synergy that these folks can do to volunteer in the childcare, volunteer the elderly care, and it could be an interesting thing. Back to overseas, I used to do business development in different places, but I find it interesting that the Singaporeans will go to Ho Chi Minh City, for example. We are prepared to look at and go through the very dark alley, climb up a very dark staircase, and when you reach a rooftop, you're suddenly, wow, it's beautiful. It's a rooftop bar with fairy lights. It's not prescriptive. So why can't we do the same here? And that's why I mentioned about Kada and the rooftop space. Not prescriptive, it's not a brand new hotel with a dedicated kind of a rooftop bar, but it's something authentic. We need to bring a lot more of this kind of authentic experiences back in Singapore. And you can do that with a new building, but if you do that with a old building and you pivot it differently, I think it's more interesting.
Okay. Before we end off, I promise that I'll give Colin like 3 seconds to
Aiyo.
shout out the SLA merch that they're doing, because I'm very excited about what SLA is doing, because you said a lot of things about the new buildings that are coming up. So I think if you see it and you want it, then you got to ask him how to get it, because apparently
It sounds like a song. If you see it, you want it.
ask Colin for it, and you might get a notebook or a tote bag.
If you look at this tote bag, it's a nifty, fairly well designed. But if you look at this, is all the names of the state properties. If you turn around, these are all state properties. Your Kada is here, Old Kallang Airport is here. But given a fresh lease of life, I think fairly interesting. And this is a corporate souvenir. So we went around, people like, hey, what is this? And you don't see SLA logo anywhere.
Oh, that's true.
That's deliberate. It forces you to have a conversation starter.
So if you meet Colin later, you got to ask him all about it, because I really like the merch, and then
Thank
you
you.
got to tell us how to
Thank you.
get
Thank
it.
you.
So thank you both for being on the show.
you.
And that's it for today from The Usual Place. So thank you for sharing both your thoughts and being very candid about what we can do with old spaces. Now, if you enjoyed this conversation, do like and subscribe to ST Podcast YouTube channel, and you can get fresh content every week. So I'll see you next time at The Usual Place. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.